Hello, welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. So the latest is blue in the Deckbuilding Toolbox series for Ixalan, the Lost Caverns of. I like blue in this set. Anyone who's watched me for a while knows that I don't love counter spells. Yeah, depending on the format, I might make a counterspell deck, but I don't love it. I don't love to do it all the time. And the cards that I love about blue in this set are not its counterspells. There's all this other neat stuff that blue is doing. Let's just get into it. I'm going to start with the commons and uncommons here. Arazka Puzzle Door. 1 blue artifact, common, 1 and tap. Sack it. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one in your hand, the other in your graveyard. That's neat. So you've moved both of the cards you looked at. Neither of them goes back to the top of the library or even the bottom of the library. You had to put in 2 total mana, but you paid it in installments. It's far, far easier to pay mana in installments than it is to pay it all at once, as anyone who's ever taken a loan or a mortgage will tell you. This is fine. If you've got artifact synergies baked into your deck, this could be great. It's it's a perfectly serviceable little piece of, card churn, card selection. You get to put this and something else into your graveyard in the process. So if your deck has some artifact synergies in it, or some mill synergies in it, etc., then yeah, this could be alright. It could be playable, if the wind is blowing just so. It's only a common. It's easy to experiment with. Relic's Roar. Normally I hate cards like this and I would never bring them up in this kind of a guide, but this one is special. And the reason it's special is the mana cost is 1 blue. There have been a lot of blue limited, power toughness setting effects similar to this, that are 2 mana, 3 mana. Sometimes they draw you a card, sometimes they don't. They've been printed ad nauseum, so it's easy to miss what's special about this card. It's 1 mana. It's 1 mana, and furthermore, it doesn't have to target a creature, it can target an artifact. So you can animate your blood token, or your treasure token, or your power stone, or your map token, or do I need to keep going? And you can turn this thing that had no power and toughness into 4 damage. 4 damage for 1 blue mana. And that is a good rate. That's the kind of rate that a red deck would envy. In fact, you might even like it in a blue-red deck. I'm saying this card can be really, really aggressive. The price is right. It needs a little setup. It does. You can't just throw it into any deck and say, oh, I've got a 4/3 with haste. No, you gotta set it up. But the price is right. The damage is sky high for 1 mana. It makes all the difference in the world whether a card like this is like 1 mana or 3 mana. This is something to look at. Spyglass Siren. I like it. It's neat. Already sees a little bit of fringe play here and there on the ladder. So it's a pirate. It flies. So you've got Flying Man from Arabian Nights. And when it ETBs, you get a map token. So this is a fairly aggressive card. It's not bad to bounce, it's not bad to flicker. The map token can get you card advantage. If it's not getting you card advantage, it's making your creature bigger. And it could then flip something into your graveyard if you wanted to. Only at sorcery speed. And this fairly aggressive blue card actually plays pretty well with Relic's Roar. I think this is pretty good. Anything that's only 1 or 2 mana that puts multiple pieces of stuff out as permanents is usually, there's a chance it's playable. However bad it may look, there's always a chance it's playable. And this one doesn't even look that bad. Right, a ninja deck. Let's say you got a ninja deck. And you fly in with this, you turn it into a ninja, bounce it back to your hand, ETBs makes another map token. That's great for 1 mana. I think it's got uses. Waterlogged Hulk. This one I am not as sure about. It's cheap. 1 blue. Artifact. Tap, mill a card. Straightforward. Maybe a little slow. There are faster ways to mill yourself. It's cheap, though. Easy to fit into your mana curve. Then it has Craft with Island for 4. That's not hard to do. In a mono blue deck, you know, you'll mill an island. If you're not in mono blue, there are color fixing lands that have the type island that you could also have in your deck. So, you could take one in from in play, but it's more likely you'll take one from the graveyard. Turns into a vehicle. And this vehicle could block for you right away, as I understand it. Right, it'll have summoning sickness when it comes back, because you exiled it and flipped it. But it will be able to crew as a blocker right away, and that would be a 4/4 with vigilance. The crew 1's easy. And then descend 8, can't be blocked as long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. That's kind of... I guess that's good. Relevant could come up. Yes, yes. Could turn into the game-ending threat, much like a 4/4 flyer, except even the flyers can't block it. As long as something survives to the opponent's turn as 1 power, then you could crew up an extra 4/4 vigilance here to be on the defending side. That's pretty good. It's a pretty good sized body, even against, like, mono red with its pump spells that it's doing right now. 4/4 is still pretty big. Still likely to trade and block a lot of incoming damage in that case. So, not useless. Not a do-nothing on the turn that you flip it. Does that make it good enough? I don't know. Just an uncommon, though. Chart a Course, this is a reprint. It's great. It's from the original Ixalan. If you haven't had a chance, haven't had the pleasure, it's amazing. Really and truly. We have a similar card from Streets of New Capenna, but it costs black and blue. Where you draw 2, discard 1, and then if you have enough different mana costs in your graveyard, then it just becomes a draw 2. This one, well, we cut the black out of the cost. It's a sorcery, so there's that. But if you're in a deck that's attacking with little creatures, you probably don't care too much about, you know, holding open mana. Probably just getting more fuel for the fire is good. So yeah, 2 mana, draw 2 cards as long as you attacked, as long as you can be aggressive. That's really, really good. And the fail case on this card, where you draw 2, discard 1, is fine. It's perfectly fine. You might even want to use it for that if you're doing, like, I don't know, a reanimator deck, something like that. Just seriously, there's so many things it can do. Price is right. Drawing 2 cards for 2 is good. Eaten by Piranhas. This is an aura. It's blue and 1, has flash, and it enchants a creature. The creature loses all abilities and is a black skeleton creature with base power and toughness 1/1. So this is a little bit like, you know, the Upright Citizen. Sorry. There's a 1 blue aura from Streets of New Capenna, which makes someone a legitimate business person. 1/1, no abilities. This one costs 2, but it has flash. And that means you could use it as a combat trick. Which means if you cared to, you could probably block and kill their now 1/1 attacking creature. Kind of hilarious. This, for example, is a way that you could kill, like a flipped Itali. Right? They've gotten down Itali, they have paid the mana into it, flipped it over, it's like, got 11 power, trampling, it's indestructible, it's going to deal poison damage to you. Eaten by piranhas. Block it with a 1/2. Kill it. I'm not saying that kind of thing is going to happen all the time, but this is a good spell. The flash does a lot for it. So, yeah, I'm thinking this is going to be worth your time. The matchup where it doesn't look as good is against mono red. Because most of mono red's creatures are pretty small to begin with. Some white decks also, it might not do as well there, but at least in the white decks it's changing its creature type to skeleton. So they're not getting soldier bonuses, they're not getting human bonuses. It's just turned into a skeleton, and they probably don't have a skeleton bonus. There is one now, but they probably don't have it. Inverted Iceberg. So, 2-mana artifact, common. When it ETBs, you mill a card, and you draw a card. So it replaces itself, puts an artifact onto the field, and mills you a card into your graveyard. And as long as you want the artifact and the mill, then playing something on 2 that replaces itself is, it's alright. You know, it's not great, but as long as you want those other things to happen, then this is fine. Later, you can pay 6 at sorcery speed and craft it with an artifact. Either another one in play or in your graveyard. And you get a 6/6. 6/6 artifact creature golem, Iceberg Titan. Whenever it attacks, you may tap or untap. Target artifact or creature. So it could give itself vigilance, sort of. By untapping itself, it can tap down a blocker of the opponent's to get it out of the way. It could probably get into some other shenanigans, but being a 6-mana, sort of, 6/6, you're probably not that likely trying to pull off like combo shenanigans with it. I'm just saying there are some synergies, some tap abilities of artifacts that maybe you wouldn't expect that come up with it. Anyway, anything that only costs 2 and replaces itself, kind of, it plays well with like certain types of like mid-range control type decks. You know, it's like it's moving you through your cards, it's like kind of advancing your game, it's got incremental advantages. As long as you can find a use for the artifact, as long as you can find a use for the milled card, that kind of thing, then yeah, you're not just churning your wheels playing these cantrip effects, as long as you're getting a little something extra every time you do. Lodestone Needle. So, blue and 1, uncommon, artifact, flash. When it ETBs, tap up to 1 target artifact or creature. Puts 2 stun counters on it. Now, that by itself does not impress me. It's okay. We have other effects that are similar. They don't really see play. But this one hangs around as a permanent, and on top of that, you can pay 3 to craft with artifact. So again, another artifact in play. We're in the graveyard. I won't keep rehashing, just first couple of reminders. Flips into the Guidestone Compass. Now this is an artifact that says pay 1 and tap, target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. That's worth the trouble. That is really strong. It's just 1 mana to draw you a land or put a counter on your creature and maybe mill something into your graveyard. Exploring for 1 mana every turn is really, really strong. It's like a map token that never goes away. So, I don't love the front face of the card. And usually you have to judge things by their front face more so. The card really needs to stand on its own. Like when we looked at white clay-fired bricks, I felt was good enough on the front face. This one I'm not sure if it's good enough on the front face, but it might be. And I love what it flips into. See what you can do with it. Oaken Siren. So I got a common. It's a 1/2 flying vigilance siren pirate. Artifact creature. Tap for a blue. Spend this mana only to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability of an artifact source. I feel like maybe we've got a critical threshold of artifact synergy now in Standard. You know, we've had 1 or 2, you know, kind of hems and haws here and there. Brothers War didn't quite do it. You still see the occasional Brothers War deck from time to time. But there's more, so much more, artifact synergy help that came with Ixalan. I feel like now, in Standard, you could probably build a heck of an artifact deck. I'm thinking of the white rare. It's not legendary. It taps for mana you can only spend in the same way as this. It makes white. This one makes blue. This one is an artifact. So that white card could pay for this, and this card could pay for that white artifact. They make different colors of mana, but they can both be put towards artifacts and activated abilities of artifacts. So just that on its own, that's 8 cards that aren't legendary, that are 2 mana producers for this theoretical deck. Then on top of that, you've got the legendary one that turns into equipment, right? Irencrag. And you could play at least 1 copy of that with no cost deck building whatsoever, really. And just use it as a 2 mana rock. 1 copy doesn't even come into the picture as a drawback from legendary. And for the deck we're talking about, you could maybe go to 2 copies too. And that would be 10 2 mana producers. Of which, you know, at that point 6 of them wouldn't have summoning sickness because they aren't creatures. So then you could ramp into yet more mana production. And that's starting to get a little silly. That's starting to look a little bit closer to like where Commander is. But we're in a 60 card format here, so I'm just saying maybe this isn't as weak as it looks. And maybe the artifact deck's got legs. River Herald Scout. We have a 1/2, it's common, blue and 1, Merfolk Scout. When this ETBs, it explores. This is a functional reprint of a vampire, a black uncommon vampire from the original Ixalan. Right, so the colors changed, the creature types changed, but that card was a 1/2 for 2 that explored when it ETBs. it was good enough to see play back then. If you were in the Explore deck, having a 2-mana Explore creature is exactly what you wanted. Green-black Explorer often ran that card. Now, I don't know if it's good enough in this standard, but it might be. Explore can be card advantage, or it could make this into a 2/3, which is a reasonable chunk of body on the battlefield on 2. Could help you mill things into the graveyard. There's a lot going for it. That's before we get into any funky synergies that an Explore deck might have to offer. So, I think this card is worth looking at. Shipwreck Sentry. There have been a couple of other 3/3s for 2 in blue that have Defender, that if you fulfill some condition, the wind's blowing right, it loses Defender. This one, the condition is, as long as an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn. And with how bad the other creatures like this are, it might be easy to overlook this. One of them, I believe, only triggered when an enchantment enters the battlefield, which is much harder to pull off. And another one was if you controlled 2 or more modified creatures. And again, not the easiest thing to pull off. This one is if an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn. That's easy. That's so easy. You could play a Spyglass Siren. You could play your card draw spell, your Araska Puzzle Door. There are so many things that make token artifacts. We're overflowing with them, frankly. Overflowing with treasures and power stones and blood and maps. The Shipwreck Sentry, I'm saying, would be very easy to turn on. Very easy to turn on. And if you're thinking about making an blue aggro deck, which I will probably try here at some point, then you might think about putting it in the same deck with Relic's Roar. Because if you're making a bunch of token artifacts, why not turn one of them into a 4-power critter and smash the opponent's face while you're playing your 3/3s for 2? You know, the other ones of this ilk have not been that great. This one, however, I think could definitely be different. Might be worth brewing. Staunch Crewmate. We've got a human pirate. It's 2/1, uncommon for 2. When it ETBs, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact or pirate from among them. Put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. The reason I like this card is the price is right. You get a 2-power, 2-drop creature, which, if you build your deck to take advantage of this effect, it should almost always hit. On rare occasion, you could flip up 4 lands. Otherwise, you should be able to construct a deck where everything is a pirate or an artifact. And at that point, it's a 2-power, 2-drop creature that draws you a card. Those have historically been very good. Now, I don't know if the deck you can build with this, that's full of pirates and artifacts, is going to be good enough. I'm not sure. But it might be. You could have the Shipwreck Sentry in it. Who knows? Could be a blue aggro deck's in the making. I like cards like this. I'm willing to see if it can get there. Alright, Confounding Riddle. So I'm actually going to look at a counterspell here. So this is a blue uncommon. 1 blue, 2 colorless. It's an instant. You choose 1 when you cast it. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So in that first mode, it's interesting. You a lot of cards like this will put them on the bottom in a random order. This one shoves all the cards you don't pick into your graveyard. And that's a proactive enough strategy for me. I feel like some decks might want this card just for its first mode. Just so you're like, you know, Traxa goes to the graveyard, Atali goes to the graveyard, Invasion of Telvada goes to my hand, this land goes to the graveyard, something like that. Then there's a second mode. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 4. That's not a great counter spell. You know, that's if you took Mana Leak and increased the cost by 1 and the mana tax by 1. That's not amazing. But if you like the first mode on the card, if you would run the first mode on the card to fill up your graveyard with stuff and churn through your deck, then the second mode on the card comes kind of free. And that would be pretty great. Waterwind Scout. This is a 2/2 flyer for 3. When it ETBs, you make a map token. So this is, you know, we've seen a lot of cards kind of like this that usually are like, they're good in limited, but they usually don't quite make it in standard. There's so many cards like it. In this case, it makes an artifact token, and it could help an Explorer deck. And if that happens to be just the right niche that your deck is looking to do, then it's not impossible. This could do something for a constructed deck. Not holding my breath, but yeah, not impossible. Alright, Zoetic Glyph. I have seen people adopting this a lot. It is a very aggressive card. If it does manage to hit the battlefield, then you know, once it goes to a graveyard, you discover 3. It is nasty. I'll say it's a nasty card if you can get it to resolve and stick on the field. So let's go ahead and read it. It's a blue and 2. It's an uncommon enchantment, it's an aura. It enchants an artifact, specifically. So the artifact is a golem creature with base power and toughness 5/4 in addition to its other types. That is aggressively costed at 3. Right? Like what I was saying about Relic's Roar being extremely aggressively costed as 4 damage for 1 mana. Some of the same thing applies to 5 damage for 3 mana, which is like a more permanent source of damage, something you could hit them with again next turn if they don't stop it. If they do stop it, and if they stop it by killing it, then the aura goes to the graveyard, and you discover 3. You might even discover another Zoetic Glyph. I can see where this card is good. Fair warning to those of you out there, I've also seen where this card is bad. Once I kind of was aware of what this card is and started seeing it across the table from me, beware if your opponent is holding open mana, and their colors might at all be able to, at instant speed, destroy your creature. And just about every color can threaten to do that. I haven't seen a lot of green decks adopt the instant speed bite spells, but every color could muck with you if they wanted to. If they kill your creature as you're trying to cast or bounce your artifact, right? It's because it goes on an artifact. But if they somehow muck with the target of the glyph, which makes it doubly vulnerable if it's an artifact creature, then if the glyph fizzles, it has all of the same card disadvantages any aura in the game. It's a really strong aura, and just, you know, that problem alone might not mean it's not worth playing. The deck's not worth doing. Not saying that. I'm just saying be cautious. maybe there are turns where you don't slam the glyph. You try to be a little more cagey and find the right moment to play it. Maybe you try to wait until you have a non-creature artifact token that's harder for the opponent to interact with. That kind of thing. Because I've definitely had some games recently where I blew out some opponents with instant speed removal. As soon as they tried to target the glyph, destroyed their target. Comes up. Beware. Self-reflection. This one's neat. It's kind of too expensive. But it can be a free clone if you mill it into the graveyard and you flash it back. So it's an uncommon 6-mana sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, and you can flash it back for 4. This thing feels really powerful as an uncommon. I mean, it costs a boatload of mana, don't get me wrong. But sometimes when you're looking at, like certain types of ramp or control decks and you're trying to build it on a budget, you're trying to find good budget options for that style of deck, sometimes it's good to identify where real power lies among the uncommons, and this is real power. Yes, it's a lot of mana, but if you can make 2 copies of your best creature, then that's a big deal. It's not impossible you could get to 10 mana and do this all in one turn by top decking it in a ramp deck. And in a ramp deck, you might have some very good targets. It's not necessarily win more either. Sometimes a ramp deck gets pretty pressured by an aggressive deck. You're trying to like stabilize and backpedal and stabilize and backpedal, and there's this back and forth that rages for a while. And you could really clinch the game by doing something like having 10 mana open and top decking Self-Reflection, Copy Titan of Industry twice. Marauding Brine Fang. So the real selling point here is island cycling. Now, when I talked about the white plane cycler, I mentioned that it had a lot of stiff competition in Standard, and that's true. Specifically for planes, there are a lot of things now that will fetch you a planes for about 2 mana. Not quite as common with islands. The other members of this cycle might be a little stronger than the white one. So, if what you would like to do is make sure you're hitting your land drops, and you have some room to play a few giant critters in your deck as a matter of course, as you're trying to hit your land drops, then yeah. Yeah, you could run Marauding Brine Fang. This is probably more of a budget option. There are probably more expensive ways, if you have rare and mythic cards, to try to get head on mana and develop your game. But really, this is fine. You can island cycle this early, you can play it as a gigantic threat with Ward 3 late, which makes it very annoying for the opponent to try to hit with removal. Ward 3 is pretty backbreaking. I'm not saying the opponent can't do it, they just, even late in the game, they might have to commit just about all their mana to it. As long as you want the island cycling, I think it will do you well. And, if you got a reanimator strategy, something where you want to reanimate, like, everything out of your graveyard at the same time, that could be fun too. Okay. Time to craft a few cards. On to the rares and mythics. I really love a lot of what Blue's doing in this set. I am pretty impressed, I gotta say. The Enigma Jewel. Look at this thing. 1 blue. It's a mythic. It's legendary. It's an artifact. And it comes in tapped. Tap, add 2 colorless. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. If this card didn't do anything else, if that was the only thing it did, I would still be racking my brain trying to build around this card, because netting 2 extra mana for 1 is ridiculous. That is the rate of a Soul Ring. Now you can't use it the turn that you play it. It comes in tapped. Right? So it's... And you can't use the mana for any purpose. They've, this... And it's legendary. There's a bunch of fixes here compared to a Soul Ring, but still. This kind of mana acceleration smacks of a Soul Ring. And I would definitely be trying to find a way to use it. Like back in Urza's Saga, there was this artifact for 1 mana that produced 2 colorless mana during your upkeep. Which, as you know, if you can't spend it during your upkeep, then your mana pool clears. And back then there was mana burn too. But I love cards like this. Cards where you have to scratch your head a little bit to figure out the best way to spend the mana with them. This card reminds me of that card a little bit. But hey, there's this ability for 9 mana here. And I believe you could use this card to pay for part of that 9. Right? So it's actually kind of like it's 7 mana, since the card can help pay for itself. Craft with 4 or more non-lands with activated abilities. That's pretty specific. And it's a lot of mana. But hey, you're already trying to use activated abilities, so you probably got some in your deck. Flips into Locus of Enlightenment, also legendary. It has each activated ability of the exiled cards used to craft it. You may activate each of those abilities only once each turn. That's neat. That's neat. So even if it's not a tap ability, you can still only do it once, but you can do it for each of the things that are on it. I kind of like it. It's kind of cool. Whenever you activate an ability that isn't a mana ability, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. That could be dumb. Potentially, that could be ridiculous. Now, all of that being said, that backside to me, all of that is gravy, right? To me, the thing that's exciting about this card is the front face, the Enigma Jewel. This 1 mana artifact that makes 2 mana. Yeah, you can only use it for activated abilities. Let's talk about a few activated abilities. Here's one. Candy Trail. Right? Turn 1, you play your Enigma Jewel. Turn 2, you play your Candy Trail. You tap the Enigma Jewel, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Sacrificing this thing. You still have 1 mana open. You played a land for the turn, right? After all that. Ominous Parcel, this wouldn't be the best one. I think I have some other options I like better, but hey. You could play this on turn 2 after your turn 1 Enigma Jewel. Use the Enigma Jewel to go find yourself another basic land. Hit your land drops. A little later in the game, you could use the Ominous Parcel as 4 damage to a creature. But I think I've got some other options I like even better. I mean, you could do stuff like the Urn of Godfire, of course. There are ways to, filter your mana, where after it's gone through the filter, then you can use it for whatever purpose you like. But I think we can do better than this. Now we're talking. Collector's Vault. I love this card. And let me just say, for anyone who's paying attention, Collector's Vault plays amazingly well with Treasure Map. Specifically the Treasure Cove. If you get the Treasure Map flipped into the Treasure Cove, then having a permanent source of treasure production means that you are just netting cards. The Enigma Jewel in this case is letting you do a loot and it's also producing you a treasure, and it's, you know, this is like your turn 1, turn 2 sequence here. Now technically you've got a treasure left after that if you wanted to cast something, or you can save it. And then turn 3, you can do your Collector's Vault for free again. Now you're up to 5 mana, right? 3 land drops, 2 treasure tokens. And you're going to keep making another treasure every turn, in addition to, you know, finding the best mix of spells and lands for your hand with Collector's Vault. Pretty amazing. Investigator's Journal is a card that I have been using in place of Reckoner Bankbuster. I won't lie to you, it's not as good as Reckoner Bankbuster, but it doesn't have to be, and you can use it a little differently. So, I mean, very often I'm fine with getting this down when there's 1 creature on the battlefield and just getting 2 card draws off of it. And you can do those back to back because as soon as you've pulled the last counter off of this, there's nothing stopping you from sacrificing it. It's not a tap ability to sacrifice it. Otherwise, if there's a lot of creatures running around, then yeah, this could come in with a bunch of counters and it's just a pile of card draws for you. And the Enigma Jewel fuels all of that for free. Monument to Perfection. This is a card that I am actually quite fond of. You can use it to pull 4 copies of Mirrex out of your deck, among other things. You can also use it to find all the basics to your heart's content. And if you happen to have some Sphere or Locust lands running around that you like other than Mirrex, you can go for that too. Getting the activated ability on this to where it's a 1-and-tap with the Enigma Jewel adding in here means that every turn you're finding a land for 1 mana. You're never missing your land drop beats, as long as you can sink 1 mana into the Monument to Perfection. I think that's pretty cool. I'll mention 3 Bowls of Porridge here. We've already looked at some of the amazing options. Here's another one. You can use this thing up to 3 times. So you can burn a creature for 2, tap down a creature, and sack this to gain 3 life. And all those modes could potentially be for the low, low price of having an Enigma Jewel on the table. It would look pretty good against a creature deck, honestly, like an aggro deck. You know, turn 1 Enigma Jewel, turn 2 3 Bowls of Porridge, that would not be bad looking at all as your removal spell for aggro. And the tapping a creature down could come up in other circumstances as well. You could tap down a mana creature on the opponent's upkeep, that kind of thing. So, I mean, you probably won't do this, but it wouldn't be that bad, I think. It's just because you've freed up the mana from having the Enigma Jewel, so suddenly this doesn't look that bad of a overall investment, really. Realmbreaker. This is another really exciting option next to the Enigma Jewel. These things that get you ahead on mana, right? So effectively you're taking the activated ability power of Enigma Jewel and you're getting these permanent advantages going forward, things like Realmbreaker, where you're milling out the opponent's deck and you're getting these permanent mana sources from them in the process. And you're not sinking in 2 mana every time, you're just sinking in like the spell cost of these 2. And that's not bad at all. A lot of people like Realmbreaker anyway. I do. I think running a 1-of copy of it in just about any, slightly slower deck gives you a much stronger matchup against, like Planeswalker control and other things like that. Gives you another angle of attack. and I think it looks great next to the Enigma Jewel. The Celestis is already pretty amazing and not that hard to trigger, but if you did want to manually trigger it, now it would just be 1 in tap with the Enigma Jewel lying around. Pretty good. There are some activated abilities of lands we could talk about too, but I just want to finally stop and draw a comparison here to the Mightstone and Weakstone. So the Mightstone and Weakstone, 5 mana legendary artifact. It does do an ETB of either draw 2 cards or give a creature -5/-5. You're getting something right there for your investment of 5 mana. It can affect the board. That's good. Moving forward with the game, one of the big selling points of the Mightstone and Weakstone is tapping for 2 colorless. You can cast big artifacts with it, and that's something that people do with it. But a very common thing I see people using the Mightstone and Weakstone for is activated abilities. And in that regard, you're making the same amount of mana with 1 blue as you would be with 5. That's enough. This card is nuts. Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel. You got a 2/1 Flash Flyer. It deals combat damage to a player, put a chorus counter on him. Then you loot, draw a discard. If there are 4 or more chorus counters on Malcolm, you may cast the discarded card without paying its mana cost. 4 is a lot. Since it has Flash, you're pretty likely to get the first hit in, to get the first counter. Then he's kind of fragile after that. You could try to play the game of protecting this card. Trying to stop the opponent's interaction. That might work. Might be a direction to go. It's at least interesting. I don't know if it's better than some of the other things we already have. Probably isn't. But, it's at least worth looking at. And if you got an aggressive kind of blue deck, then you might consider putting 1 copy of Malcolm in there just as a Flash Flyer with 2 power. Seems fine. Subterranean Schooner. I have seen this card around on the ladder already. 3/4 vehicle for a blue and 1. It's a rare. Whenever this attacks, target creature that crewed it this turn explores. Crew for 1. Super easy to crew. Very good blocker. Very aggressive. Easy to get started attacking. Starts growing your creatures that crewed it or finding you lands. So you're at least kind of churning through the deck if that happens. Just overall very solid card. Yeah, just pretty good all the way around. And if you're making an aggressive blue deck with some artifact bit theme to it, like some of the other things we talked about in the commons and uncommons, they would pair well with this. So, yeah, if you want that kind of a blue deck, it's probably worth your time. Akal Pakal. First among equals. Blue and 2. 1/5. It actually makes it too big for a cut down. Right, adds up to 6. It is a legendary human advisor. It's a rare. Beginning of each player's end step. If an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand, the other into your graveyard. So, not too hard to trigger this on your turn, but it happens at the beginning of each player's end step if an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So if you can cause an artifact to come into being under your control on the opponent's turn, then you could be drawing 2 cards through every turn cycle. you know, look at 4, pick the best 2 of them that you want, the others go to the graveyard. Seems pretty good. A good blocker. Very good blocker. And just a source of card advantage. Seems alright. As I said, out of range of cut downs, out of range of some red burn. I think there could be something here. I'm not for sure. But as long as it survives to the end step, it can do something the turn you play it. And it does create a board presence. So, you know, it checks some boxes. Could be worth looking at. Kitesail Larcenist. You got a 2/3 human pirate for 3. It's rare. It's flying in Ward 1. When this ETBs for each player, choose up to 1 other target artifact or creature that player controls. So, in our normal standard, it means you could pick one of your things as well as one of the opponent's things. For as long as this remains on the battlefield, chosen permanents become treasure and lose all other abilities. Some interesting things you could do with this. You could take like a token creature or a map token or something like that, and you could convert it into a treasure token to get a burst of mana. That's kind of neat. But the more obvious use of what you do with this is you turn off one of your opponent's creatures, probably. You make it into a treasure, it loses all other abilities for as long as this is on the battlefield. And yeah, the opponent can kill it. It does have Ward 1 and 3 toughness. It's not unkillable, but it's annoying to kill. And not unlike a Brutal Cathar, it's troublesome enough that if the timing is right, it might not matter if the opponent can kill it, because you've got so much going on that the tempo advantage you gained was good enough. It's a neat card. Probably worth using. A little bit less my style, because I don't like things where the opponent can get it back later. But at the very least, this would not trigger ETB triggers again, because it just changes from being a treasure artifact back to being its normal self. It didn't exile and leave play and then come back into play. So at least you're dodging that. Unfortunately, it's not going to be summoning sick either, so it would be able to attack. People are probably going to like it. It's probably going to see play. The Ever-Flowing Well. Blue and 2, legendary artifact, rare. When this ETBs, you mill 2 cards, and you draw 2 cards. And if that was all it did, there might still be some decks that would want it. I'm not saying it would be amazing, right? Divination is not a card that sees standard play, really. At sorcery speed, I mean. But, this produces an artifact on the battlefield, and you do get a mill out of it. So, you got a permanent you can play with, you've added material to your graveyard, and you've drawn 2 cards. That's not bad. That is not bad at all. And that's what you're really looking for with these kind of flip cards, is something that's good enough on the front face. I think the front face is pretty alright here. Descend 8. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, transform the Ever-Flowing Well. It's okay if the opponent blows this up or whatever before you get there because you got value out of it. But if you hit your Descend 8 and reach your upkeep, then you get a land, it's a legendary artifact land called the Myriad Pools. Taps for a blue. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by this, up to one other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. Now notice it has to be a permanent spell. So you can't turn your creature into a sorcery. They thought about that. It has to be a permanent spell. But you could turn your creature into a planeswalker? It's only until end of turn, so that would probably be an example where you would not want to do that, because it would have 0 loyalty and it would just die. Something that's already in play also doesn't get the enters the battlefield triggers. So bear that in mind. But you could get some, some big creatures this way. You could get some attack triggers this way. Things that have good activated abilities, good death triggers. And also, let me back up a second here and say that if you got the front face of this card and flipped it into a land, that is yet more value. Now you're up on mana in addition to everything else you've done. And you can probably find some way, somehow, at some point in the game, to get a benefit out of this ability from the Myriad Pools. The front face of the card looks pretty doggone good. So even if you have some qualms about how you're able to use the backside of the card, front face of the card's pretty good. I like it. Tishana's Tidebinder. It's a 3/2 with flash. Blue and 2. Merfolk Wizard. Rare. When this ETB's counter up to one target activated or triggered ability. If an ability of an artifact, creature, or planeswalker is countered this way, that permanent loses all abilities for as long as Tishana's Tidebinder remains on the battlefield. So, you can counter any activated or triggered ability, right? You could flash this in to counter the activated ability of a Field of Ruin, and the opponent's just down a land. It doesn't do the thing where it turns off the permanent if the ability's not from an artifact, creature, or planeswalker, but sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes just countering an activated or triggered ability is enough. And some of the stuff you can turn off with this card is pretty good. Like, you can flash this in and turn off the triggered ability of Portal to Phyrexia, where you would sacrifice 3 creatures. Nope, that's a triggered ability. Flash this in, counter that thing, turns off the portal, which is also worth doing. I'm going to be a very high value target for this ability. This stuff comes up in all kinds of crazy ways. You can counter stuff you could never imagine that you were able to counter. You're like, what? I can counter that? I can stop that from happening because it's a trigger? What? Yes. Yes, there's so many weird, crazy things you can counter with this. I think this is good. I think it's definitely worth playing with. Alright, we've got O'Hare Pakpatik, Deepest Epoch. Sorry if I mispronounced that. 2 blue, 2 colorless, mythic rare. 4/3 legendary creature god. Flying. Alright, 4 power flyer for 4. Those historically have not done well for a while in Standard. Let's see what this one does. Whenever you cast an instant spell from your hand, it gains rebound. Well, that's freaking good. Even if all you were doing was just, unsummoning this to save it from a removal spell back to your hand, giving that bounce spell Rebound to reset one of your opponent's creatures on your next upkeep, it's probably worth it. That's probably a good play. Or, getting this down with 1 mana open, nothing else happens, you draw like a little 1 mana card draw spell in blue. This doubles it up to where it rebounds on your next upkeep. And if that's at the end of your opponent's turn, then it happens like, kind of right away, sneakily. Like it happens at the end of their turn, then you get it again on your upkeep, right after you untap. I could see a lot of situations where this card's actually really strong. Rebound is extremely good. A lot of cards were not meant to have it. I'm just talking about 1 mana spells right now because I'm trying to think of things you could do if you have 5 mana open when you cast this. Because you probably don't want to cast it just onto a blank board. You could, though, because when this dies, you return it tapped and transformed with 3 time counters on it. So, if the opponent kills it, you get a land. And the Temple of Cyclical Time, oddly enough, is not legendary. Tap for a blue, remove a time counter from it. And then you can pay 3 and tap and transform it if it has no time counters on it, only as a sorcery. So after you've spent mana from the land 3 times, then you can transform it back into the god again. And when it becomes the land is tapped. But when it becomes the god again, the god is untapped. Worth noting. I was not very keen on the white god that triples counters. I felt like that card was expensive and hard to use. This one I'm more excited about. This one looks more like the real deal. It's 2 mana cheaper. And it feels like the things it's doing are easier to pull off. So, this is a god I can get behind. Alright, so that brings me to the end of blue rares and mythics. I gotta pick some things to craft. So when I talk about toolbox cards that can go in a wide variety of decks, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about right here. Man. It's a card draw spell. And a permanent, and a source of milling. Come on. It wouldn't even be that bad in multiples because you just play the multiples to draw more cards. You don't care if you're legend ruling the other ones. They just help it get to its descend count faster. I don't even know if legendary is a drawback in this case. Anyway. Crafting one. This card looks very strong to me. It's a flash 3-power creature for 3 mana that probably just pulled the rug out from under the opponent, tripping up something they didn't think you had any power to control. If it starts to see enough play in Standard, people might start to fear their triggered and activated abilities being countered, but normally people take them for granted. I think this card is really, really good. I'm going to go ahead and craft one. Yes, I already have a copy of the Enigma Jewel, but I like to, based on how many wild cards I have, I like to, spend like 2 rares and a mythic on each of the colors, and then I kind of save up a bit towards the end when I get to multicolor. Let's do a few more. This Enigma Jewel seems absolutely ridiculously bustedly powerful to me. And despite being legendary, I don't say this very often. If you watch my channel, you know I don't say this often. Despite being legendary. And having no real upside to having multiple copies of this legendary card if you draw them in multiples. The upside of getting this down on turn 1 to turn on all the other stuff in your deck is absurdly good. It's absurdly, ridiculously good. There is a blue creature that does something similar. It dies to every kind of removal ever in the whole format. This is hard to interact with. It's an artifact. Black can't hardly touch it. This card to me seems just... Gosh, I don't need to keep talking. Let's just craft a copy. I'm probably going to end up crafting all 4 here at some point. I'm going to hold off for a minute, but I'm probably going to craft all 4. Alright, that brings us to the end of blue. I've got a much more exciting review of blue here than I've had in many sets. I'm glad to say. I like what blue's doing here. Please do more of this, Wizards. Next, we're going to move on to black next time. So do the YouTube stuff, like and subscribe, all that jazz. Until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.